Binger was born in St. Paul, Minnesota on October 25th, 1897. After completing his studies in architecture, Mr. Binger, or Bing as he was known, joined the St. Paul firm of Ellerby and Company. Bing played a very important part in the success of Ellerby, and on one special assignment, in 1924, he was sent to Cleveland to manage the construction of Unit Number 1 for the now tremendously expanded hospital of the Cleveland Clinic Foundation, under the direct influence of the famous Dr. Groh. It seems quite conceivable to me that with the rapid expansion happening at the Cleveland Clinic, Bing could have easily found a permanent place for himself and his family there. But when it became known that the Mayo Clinic had plans to expand and build in 1928, he was transferred to Rochester permanently. Anthony Capone was born in 1921 in Italy. His family lived what has been described a hardscrabble life. When Capone was still a child, his father immigrated to the United States in search of a better life. Capone followed him at age 15. During World War II, Capone was part of the Allied military government, serving as an interpreter behind the lines. While in service, Capone was stationed in Florence, Italy, and other locales where he saw many of the great masterpieces firsthand. Mrs. Capone, who we are very fortunate to have with us today, has said that was really his art education. Ivan Mestrovich was born on August 15, 1893, in a small mountain village of Slavonia, what is now present-day Croatia. He spent his childhood in the small Dalmatian village of Adavus in the Dinaric Alps. His father was a poor peasant and a sheep breeder. At the age of 16, Mestrovich was accepted as an apprentice by the master stonemason Pavel Blinich and moved to Split on the Dalmatian coast. Having learned of the talented young apprentice, a wealthy Viennese patron offered to pay for Mestrovich to move to Vienna to attend the Academy of Fine Arts, where he studied under Edmund von Helmer and Otto Wagner. He excelled. Mestrovich participated in his first major group exhibition in 1905 with the Secession Group in Vienna. His work quickly became popular with collectors and other artists. In 1908, Mestrovich moved to Paris. The sculptures made during this period earned him an international reputation. By that time, his mastery of the material had become so great that it led Auguste Rodin to call him the greatest phenomenon amongst sculptors. A compliment that is so great, at least in my mind, that it is without comparison. Mestrovich received the Grand Prix for his work exhibited in the Serbian Pavilion at the 1911 Rome International Exhibition. Afterward, he remained in Rome to study the ancient Greek sculpture. During World War I, he exhibited in Paris, Cannes, London, and Switzerland. In 1915, he became the first artist of Croatian descent to exhibit work at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. In 1922, he moved back to Zagreb in the newly formed Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. There he met and he married his wife, Olga Kesterchanek. They had 4 children together. His professional and personal life flourished. He began teaching at the Academy of Fine Arts in Zagreb, eventually becoming its director. His acclaim and his wealth continued to grow as he accepted numerous public and private international commissions. He traveled extensively, posting exhibitions around the world. In 1924, he exhibited at the Brooklyn Museum in New York, then in Chicago in 1925, and even in Egypt and Palestine in 1927. During the April War in 1941, Mestrovich was living at his lake home in Split. Having been warned that the Croatian authorities could not guarantee his safety in Split, he moved back to Zagreb in September of 1941. Rumors of his imminent emigration began to swirl, and Mestrovich was arrested On November 7th, 1941, he spent 3.5 months in prison. With the help of the Vatican, he was conditionally released to attend the independent state of Croatia pavilion at the Venice Biennale. At the conclusion of the Biennale, Mestrović relocated to Rome, where he stayed and worked in the Pontifical Croatian College of St. Jerome. In July 1943, Mestrović secured a visa to Switzerland, and he remained there until the end of the war. In 1946, Syracuse University offered him a full professorship, and he immigrated to the United States. He became the first artist of Croatian descent to exhibit his work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in 1947. So now that we know who the characters are, let's visit how they came together to realize this masterpiece. By 1943, it had become imperative to church leadership that the construction of a new, larger facility be undertaken just as soon as materials would again become available after the conclusion of World War II. A building committee was organized and charged with the responsibility of obtaining suitable land, planning the new building, making arrangements for the disposition of the old church property once the congregation had settled into its new home. The congregation voted to sell the existing property to the Kaler Corporation, with the stipulation that it would have to have the use of the old building until the new facility was ready for occupation. After reviewing several sites, the committee settled on a parcel located on 3rd Street and 6th Avenue Southwest. Ellerby and Company, with Edgar W. Binger as its local representative, were chosen as its architects. The plans they submitted for the building and parsonage were adopted by the congregation, and the building committee agreed that a carved stone altar was desired. Excavation for Trinity officially began at a groundbreaking ceremony held on August 12, 1947. After several lengthy delays, the building was completed, and the formal dedication service finally took place on June 10, 1951. The term Italian Romanesque is used to describe the architecture of Trinity Lutheran Church, which was designed to meet the needs of the congregation while celebrating the traditional liturgical heritage of the Lutheran Church. At the time of the official dedication, the altar was not completed, and the sanctuary contained only the altar and pews. The Binger family established a fund to appoint the chapel, and the Trinity Guild continued working for the day when the altar Reredos project would be complete. It wasn't until 1955 that the time seemed appropriate to seek the right sculptor. Bing, having worked in association with some of the country's foremost artists when the Mayo Clinic art program was being developed, had the contacts and made the necessary inquiries. Artists and critics alike considered even Mestrović to be the ideal candidate for the job. By this time, Mestrović had relocated from Syracuse, New York to South Bend, Indiana, where he'd become chair of the art department at the University of Notre Dame. He had already completed a previous commission in Rochester at the Mayo Clinic, Man in Freedom, in 1954. Until the Uganda building was opened in 2000, the statue remained outside. Today, it is in approximately the same location, but is now located indoors. The committee cautiously approached Mestrović and was delighted when they received his enthusiastic response. The committee suggested a theme of sacrifice, to which the artist responded, "The subject representing the supreme sacrifice of our Lord as a focus of Christian religion is the one which interests me the most." Mestrović was engaged to create a design for the Reredos. Sketches arrived within a few days, and the committee enthusiastically accepted them. The sculpture was carved in clay and cast in plaster in Mestrović's studio in South Bend. Once complete, the committee traveled to Mestrović's studio to inspect a full-scale plaster model of the crucifixion. The 8-foot-wide, 22-foot-tall model was approved and shipped to Rochester in July of 1956. Mestrovich subsequently selected St. Paul sculptor Anthony Capone, chairman of the McAllister College Art Department, to carve his design in the limestone Reredos panel. Capone had recently completed a sculpture of St. John for the exterior of the new St. John's Church in Rochester. And upon receiving the commission, Capone said, "I would not carve for other sculptors, but Mestrovich has no rival in the United States in religious sculpture, and I am honored to be able to carve for him." He went on to state that most sculptors either place their emphasis true to religion or to art. Mestrovich satisfies both the religious person and the art critic. Capone traveled to Rochester on long weekends and intermittent weekdays, working at a furious pace. And 4 months later, with the work nearly complete, Mestrovich visited Rochester to inspect the project. The master was extremely pleased with the work of his younger colleague, whom he met for the first time that day. Mestrovich suggested minor changes and approved the sculpture. 1,400 people attended the Reredos dedication services prior to the Christmas holiday in 1956. And I have to be honest with you, I was expecting 14 or 15 more of you. But thank you for coming. This is terrific. Now, back to that seemingly innocuous question. Does art become more important when the artist's creative process is understood? Simply put, I think the answer is undoubtedly yes. But beyond that, when we understand who the artist is and what they've experienced during their life, we are even better able to imagine and understand their creative process. I have a confession to make to you. I have walked past the Man in Freedom sculpture at the clinic hundreds of times in my life. I had always marveled at its beauty and even considered its similarity to the great works of Rodin. But it wasn't until I had been retained to produce an appraisal report for the conservation treatment performed on the Reredos in 2015 that I began to understand the significance of the artist Ivan Mestrovich, the man that Auguste Rodin called the greatest phenomenon amongst sculptors. As Don has already alluded to, I remember how I was struck at the sheer scale of the sculpture and how unusual I thought it was to see 5 figures at the foot of the cross. Mestrovich wrote, "The crucifixion of Christ is the most inspiring and the most impressive symbol of Christianity. In the upper part of the available space, I sculpted the crucified Savior. At his feet, I placed a group of sorrowing figures in whose hearts Christ had implanted the seeds of his teaching, love and faith in his divine mission." I now find it hard to believe, but that was a moment of discovery for me. Mestrovich is not taught in American art history books. In fact, he's not even mentioned in the 2014 catalog of the Mayo Clinic Art Collection, Art and Healing. He's apparently become a relative unknown. But this wasn't the case in 1955. That was the year Mestrovich arrived at Notre Dame at the invitation of the Reverend Theodore Hesburgh, who, after visiting the master in his Syracuse studio 2 years earlier and learning of his desire to spend his remaining years doing religious art in a place that would appreciate it, committed the necessary resources to build him a new studio in South Bend, where he sculpted and taught at the University of Notre Dame until the day of his death in 1962. Certainly, Mr. Capone realized the significance of the master. He wrote to Mestrovich, "Needless to say, I am familiar with your work. Finding it natural to identify myself with the emotional quality of your work and having great respect for you, the artist, I am both humble and confident that I have the necessary qualifications to undertake the carving of your sculpture. I can transfer your plaster model in stone with mechanical precision, yet without losing the essential warmth and spontaneity intended by you." He certainly did that. So let's make this a moment of rediscovery. Let's acknowledge and celebrate the events that caused 3 wise men to come together as one in a collaborative effort that resulted in this great masterpiece. And let's remember them. Let's acknowledge and celebrate the hidden treasure in our midst, hiding right here in plain sight before us. And let's commit to sharing it. And Donna, let me warn you, I already know of a few pilgrims who are planning to visit you in Rochester to see this masterpiece with their own eyes. And finally, let's acknowledge and celebrate our good fortune as citizens of the state of Minnesota, the city of Rochester, and as members and friends of the Trinity Lutheran Church, to have such a masterpiece to behold. And let's cherish it and continue to protect it. Thank you.
Told you I had to fiddle with this. We have a little bit of time for questions. If Miles, if you wouldn't mind, does anyone have any questions? Pastor's got a mic here. You'll have to speak into that. Can we actually? You mean the presentation? Mark's recording it.
Thumbs up from Mark.
Pastor. Yeah.
Well, to show the first slide of the three men and identify who they were?
Which was which, I think
sure.
She means. Yeah.
So, Ivan Mestrovich is in the center. Bing is on his left, and the Master Capone to his right. Kind of a handsome guy. Kind of looks like me, without the beard.
Okay, so that means that that Mr. Capone is on our left, and Mr. Binger is on our right. Any other questions?
A final appraisal of what this is worth.
Yes, it's okay.
At the time, in 2015, I appraised it at $750,000. 2015.
Okay, any other questions? I was just thinking of the same question.
There's a very specific answer to it, which I do not have off the top of my head. But as I said in my presentation, they were 5 sorrowing mourners who had accepted the Lord's lessons and taken them into their heart. But there are very specific. There is a disciple, and there is his mother, and there's Mary Magdalene, and I'm not sure who the other two are. But I could answer that question for you, given the opportunity to.
Is it very common to see other figures in a crucifixion?
I had never seen one, which absolutely stunned me. In our first telephone conversation, I was without words.
And he was, I guarantee you. Another question?
4 months. 4 months from start to finish. He worked at a feverish pace.
Go ahead.
Will your remarks be available?
I would be happy for them to be available. You're welcome.
There's some interesting things that our archive committee can talk to about this process of the carving. A fundraiser was actually established that sold pieces of the limestone as Mr. Capone actually was carving it. They would come down and they actually sold pieces of the original piece of limestone as they came down. There were some pretty stunning things that happened. That was a really immense effort on his part, and I think he had made comments about going back and forth to Rochester on a regular basis. He actually would come down. He was a professor at McAllister, and he would actually come down after class and come down to work on it, come down on the weekends. It was a major, major effort on his part. Any other questions? There's some,
I was wondering what the thickness of the original piece was up there, and if that curve at the top kind of helps to indicate the thickness, how much he actually chipped away to create the sculpture.
That is exactly the original depth, of which I am uncertain. And that information is also available in the archives. It was what Mr. Capone called thin. He didn't have a lot of room to work with.
Now, if you really think about what a sculptor normally works with, there isn't a lot there.
Yeah,
and yet, look at the dimensionality that he has accomplished with it.
Yeah, he had virtually
the
no
design.
room for error.
Where did the limestone come from?
Another
I believe
great
it's
question.
Indiana limestone. Chris, she's shaking her head. I remembered correctly. It's Indiana limestone. No.
In the back.
Where was it carved at? Here in the sanctuary, or was it stored somewhere and then he carved it someplace else?
No, that would have been impossible because the slab was laid when the wall was built. So it was actually done. Mark, do you have that image? It was actually done in place. So that's the original slab. And then, Mark, we have an image of Capone at work. So that was right here on the altar.
They actually blocked it off during that time, and people. Oh, we have some people that know. Stan.
Right.
Did everybody hear that?
No.
Okay. Basically, what he said is that there was scaffolding all the way up, which means that Mr. Capone was working up on that scaffolding, and then there was canvas that was wrapped around the scaffolding, so you really could not see. And there were piles of limestone, which got sold, and dust everywhere. Does anybody ever had any remodeling done in their house? They'll know what we're talking about. Dust everywhere.
What was the original price of the sculpture, may I ask?
It was, Chris, double check me, it was $25,000. I got the okay again. It was $25,000, and that included the work done by both of the artists.
It's my understanding that they held services, and so the Altar Guild had to clean up all that dust every week in order to have services during those 4 months. But
correct.
Could you explain to us how the clay model that was made in Indiana was used to make our sculpture?
Plaster Paris, okay.
Technically speaking, no, I can't because I'm not a sculptor. But I can tell you that he carved the original sculpture out of clay, and then it was cast in plaster. And it was the plaster cast that was then transported here on a flat rail bed and installed through.
Mark, are the pictures? Do you have the pictures of them bringing the model in?
There was a section of wall that was removed, or a large window that was removed. There was a door there previously. Okay, so it came through the side of the building.
Yeah. He stood it to the side, and there is, I don't know, can we
see it there?
Can you see? This is when it was going in. Okay. And then he actually, and again, this is only because Chris shared a lot of archive stuff with me, that they actually set the model up on the wall, the side wall, And then he used and Stan, you may have a better idea of a prism type device that he used reflective light to refract and reflect from the model onto the flat surface, and then carved.
And not to regress or digress. So here you can actually see that is the plaster model coming in through one of these windows. So it came, much like the Reredos itself, it came in sections.
Okay, is she here? Okay, I think... Huh?
One more.
One more question? Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, can you...
What are the chances of finding anything similar to this in the world today?
I've never seen anything like it. I mean, it is a true masterpiece of modern art by two master carvers, and the vision of a local giant in architecture who apparently has gone unrecognized in history. And part of what we're doing here today is retelling the history so that it doesn't get lost.
Okay. And actually, I think, and Pastor Hockwell has indicated that Miles will be available for questions afterwards, but Pastor, did you say Stephanie? I see. Oh, I couldn't see you. Okay. We have another speaker today.
Well, let's give our appreciation to Miles real quick again. And maybe as she's making her way forward, I actually hadn't, for some reason made this connection myself, but the 5 figures at the bottom, the Gospel of John records, standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son," and such forth. So those would be then the 5 figures there at the bottom.
Okay, Pastor, I think pastors.
Having had the benefit of standing at the altar many times and looking up at the Reredos, the detail in the sculpture is just incredible. Right about at my eye level, you can see the toenails of the people standing around the cross. I mean, it is that detailed. It just blows me away every time I look at it.
Okay. Our second speaker this afternoon is Stephanie Podulke, and I have a feeling that a few of the people in here know Stephanie or have at least heard her name since she's a longtime Rochester resident. Her late husband, Mike, was an Olmsted County Commissioner for 25 years, and Stephanie has served as the 1st District Commissioner since 2011. But actually, it's not her public service that's bringing her here today. As many of you probably know, Stephanie is a very accomplished and award-winning stained glass artist. Both she and Mike studied stained glass in Italy and Holland. What fun places to study. Together, they opened a small studio, actually in Minneapolis in 1972. 4 years later, they kind of looked around and decided, you know what, Rochester would be a really nice place to raise their family. So they moved here, and they opened Rochester Stained Glass in one of Rochester's original neighborhood grocery stores, which was long before my time here in Rochester, but that's really cool. Stephanie has been in the stained glass business for over 40 years and has created stained glass works or done stained glass repairs all over Rochester. Her most recent work is Donate Life, and it was a collaboration with her new husband and her son. It was designed to promote organ donation and was installed in Olmsted Medical Center actually earlier this month. I'd also like to note that Stephanie's new husband, Jim Frost, is here today with her. And actually, they're newlyweds. They were married in November. So, while Stephanie had seen most of the stained glass in Rochester over the course of the years, I actually learned after listening to her talk at a presentation for the Friends of Minneapolis Institute of Arts event that she actually hadn't seen Trinity stained glass at that point. And so I invited her, and this glass, most of the glass in here was actually made by a stained glass artist from Ohio, Robert Metcalf, who also has a connection at the Mayo Clinic in the Plummer Building. So there seems to be more of that going on around here. And so when she came, it was very interesting, and actually Pastor Adi happened to be with us at that time, because she went and she studied each of the windows, and she told us about how that particular window was made, what the techniques were, and then she might point out if there were differences between certain windows. She pointed them out to us, and it was a really, really interesting discussion. And I also remember there was a little surprise when she came in here too, is she was looking around at all of the stained glass. She stopped short and she picked up her camera. Do you remember this? And you took pictures of one particular straight on back. Yeah. And I'm going to let her talk to you a little bit more about how that one is a little bit different from the others here. And so it's with great pleasure that I welcome Stephanie Podulke today to share with us the techniques. She's going to talk about the techniques that were used to create the stained glass. Thank you. May I have a hand? Yeah. So now we're going to turn it on.
Oh, you have to turn it on.
It's on mute.
How about now? Okay. Well, that was a wonderful presentation you gave. Very academic and instructive, and had all the slides of the history. I wish I could do that for you, but there's no slides available. These were made in Yellow Springs, Ohio, in a studio, but I thought I could tell you about how it might have happened. So the first thing, Robert Metcalf designed them, and you have this wonderful book available to you. So I thought I don't need to talk about the meanings of the windows, but to tell you what I know about how I think they were made and some of the traditions. So as the first speaker said, this is a wonderful Romanesque style with the rounded tops. And yet these windows are a combination of a lot of styles. There's some Gothic elements. There's some Art Deco. There's a little bit of Cubism in them. And they sort of relate to me as an El Greco kind of style, because the bodies are sort of floating in the space. They're not sort of grounded in things like they are in some of the pictorial stained glass that you see. You see the bodies, if you look at the sky and everything, they're just sort of suspended there. It's very pretty that way. Okay, and then there's also the tradition of this side, usually in the old cathedrals, was the Old Testament side for stained glass, and this would be the New Testament side. And there are often rose windows on the east and the west sides. You have no need for stained glass in the front. And the rose window in the back, I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So what I wanted to tell you was what I could Can I just put this down on the table? Do I have to hold it? Because I talk with my hands. Okay. Let's see what happens. So the glass in these windows is almost exclusively what we call antique, which means hand-blown glass. And so I wanted just to tell you how that started. There's the glass, as you know, is melted sand and potash, and then mineral oxides that add the color. And that is melted in a thing called a glory hole. It's called that because the glass is so hot that the heat actually has light that comes out of it. And you can't tell what color it is. It's bright orange. It's so hot. And that's stirred until every grain of sand has melted. And then what happened was they would put a long pipe, hollow pipe, and collect a gather of glass on the end of that and blow a bubble and blow it a little bigger. And someone else stood at the end of that bubble. So the glass blower twirled the pipe, and someone stood at the other end with a caliper and flattened out the bubble. And you would end up with a thing like this, except it would be round. You can see that it looks, those of us my age, you know what an LP record is and what happened if you left it on the radiator, would look like this. So you can see that they're a little uneven, they're thicker in the middle, and most of the glass that was used in the Middle Ages was cut out of this section. So that's one reason why there's so many small pieces in glass from the Middle Ages. They just didn't have big sheets to cut from. And another thing that's kind of interesting, at least to me, paper was not easy to come by. Paper was very precious, so you didn't just go draw big designs on paper. They had them in their head. They had big tables, which they covered with chalk, like white powder. They drew lines in the white powder where they wanted to cut the glass. They set the glass down. This is really true. They dribbled cow urine over those lines. And cow urine has some kind of, I'm not sure what to call it, ammonia and strong stuff in it that when you draw then a glass hot rod over that, it transfers heat so efficiently that it would crack the glass. So that's how the glass, so if you were an apprentice, you know where you were. Yeah. It sounds like it smelled terrible in there. So here's a modern one. So what happened then, as things got more refined, they learned how to stand on the edge and swing that pipe. So they got long bubbles. And those long bubbles were, sort of think of it as a huge Quaker oatmeal box. And they're still pretty hot. So they would run a cutter up the inside and give it a good whack, and it would spring apart because there's so much tension in there. And then this was set on a tray and put in an annealing oven where it was heated and flattened out. So I have a picture. After a while, they began to blow them into molds, wooden molds, so that could control more the size of the oh gosh. I wonder what you were looking at. They could control how much, what the size of the sheets would be. So now, usually the sheets that Robert Metcalf would have used would be about 32 inches by 24. That's about the size that these turned out. And looking at the glass, it looks to me like it's mostly French and German antiques, all hand-blown. Now, the thing about hand-blown glass is often they would throw a rotten potato or a handful of sawdust or coal dust in this bubble, and that stuff would hit the glass surface and burn off. It's so hot, and it would leave a little air bubble in the glass. And these little air bubbles are called seeds, and they catch the light, and that's what makes the glass sparkle, compared to a sheet of machine-rolled glass, which doesn't have the sparkle. And I don't know how to do this on your slides to show you the sparkle, but the glass would look quite flat without. So he used the best glass available to make your windows, hand-blown glass. Now, I thought, how am I going to show this other thing about what happens? Take a look at what?
He zeroed in on your tabletop.
Oh, we did? Okay. So, 2 light bulbs. This is the best thing I could think of to show you why we do one of the things that we do with stained glass. If you think of this light bulb hanging by a cord over your kitchen table, can you imagine how harsh and bright and unpleasant that light would be? Unless, of course, you've been burning kerosene. This would be a miracle. But this was very harsh. So we've come up with these kind of light bulbs that have a coating that diffuse the light and make it much easier to look at. Well, we do that with glass too, because if the sun was coming straight in, unmitigated, it would be very bright and difficult to look at. So we need to do something to visually soften the surface of the glass. And we do that with glass paint. And glass paint is actually ground glass that we mix with a little gum Arabic, a little glue, so it'll stick on the glass when we paint it. And then another vehicle, either water or vinegar or sometimes oil of lavender, depends on the lines you want to paint. So what Mr. Metcalf did, he drew his designs. Now let's just say this is a piece of antique glass. This is what he cut them with. This is what we still use. A very traditional garden variety glass cutter. It has a little steel wheel that goes around, it's not even sharp, on a brass axle. And it makes a scratch on the glass, so I'm going to do that. You heard that? Okay. So there's this scratch. You see, it's not cut. You don't cut it like you think of with a knife. But that scratch has changed the molecular surface of the glass. And so if you bend it, you will be able sometimes to get it just how you want it to be. So that's how he cut it. And after he cut all the pieces of glass, he had to do a technique called waxing up. So he has a big piece of plate glass that's on a stand at a little bit of an angle, and he takes all these hundreds of pieces. So we're going to talk about, let's just use one window. He waxes them up. He puts them on the clear glass with a little piece of beeswax between them all that sticks them to the glass. So in a sense, he has the window in front of him on a piece of clear glass. That's placed in front of a nice light, whichever light it's going to be. If it's going to be a south exposure, a north exposure, those are different kinds of light. And he will begin to paint. Now, as I said, the paint is that ground glass. And we have to use special brushes. We use camel hair brushes. It's painted on, and it dries in about 30 seconds to a minute. It dries very fast, and you can't touch a dried line with a wet brush. So you really have to plan how you're going to do things, especially with hair and beards. You're painting like crazy to not have to get it all done before things dry, and if they do, you start over again. So, and then that is put in a kiln and heated up to somewhere around 1200 degrees, where that glass paint actually melts right into the surface. So it's permanent, it doesn't come off. There are windows that are a little different that are done with enamels, but not these. These are done with real glass paints. Now, this is what we use for what we call tracing lines. That's the heavier black lines that you see. And the reason then it's waxed up is so that he can make those lines continuous, so you don't have jogs and things, so it looks like one thing visually. But the soft things, the faces, look at the shading on the faces, look at the shading on each piece of glass. Every piece of glass has been painted. Every piece. You have to keep track of those. And that, we make the paint into a much softer slurry. And we use a brush like this, which is badger hair. Badgers have naturally split ends. And so these brushes are very soft. You could just, have a relationship with it. They're so soft. And so you have a special way of spreading the paint around so it's a mat. So now the whole piece is covered with this very thin layer of paint. And then you use brushes like this, which you use to remove the paint where you want the piece to be brightest. It's like working with a negative. Some of you know what negatives look like. Digital cameras don't. But if you remember negatives, they're the opposite, And so working with glasses is the opposite. We, rather than oil painters who add white to bring out highlights, we remove the paint. So more paint will come through the places we want to be highlighted. And he is wonderfully skilled at doing that on the shade. Look at the shading of Mary's face. So that whole face was once covered with not black, but brown, an antique brown paint. And he has very carefully pulled away the paint to give the nice soft shadows on her face. And look at Joseph's face. You see the beard and the cheekbones. All of that was done by removing paint. So then that's fired. And then oftentimes, if I imagine he's skilled enough to do that, and I studied with painters who are. If you put on a water mat first, usually there's 2 or 3 firings on what we call the flesh, on hands and face, to get that effect. You can, if you're skilled enough, you can put an oil wash. So you mix it with oil and you put that one over. It doesn't disturb the water one. And you can remove a little more. And then if you're really good, you can put on a vinegar wash over that. And so you don't have to fire it 3 times. You can fire it once. That is when I see all the painting he did, I imagine he was that good to be able to do that. So that's the painting part. Let's see, and I showed you the cutting part. Oh, the lead. So after he's all done, and all the pieces are painted, and he's happy with that, then it's assembled with lead. So this lead usually comes in a 6-foot strip. You can see that it's soft. It has a channel on both sides, so that it's kind of like putting a puzzle together. Glass fits in this channel, and then the next piece in that channel. So you start in one corner and you build to the other. And wherever 2 pieces of lead come together, you solder it. And I wanted to show you too. So I just cut that lead. So lead is the thing that lets us do it, and in the end, it's the thing that needs to be replaced. Especially old country churches that didn't have storm windows. After about 60 years, the lead begins to get fatigued and the windows begin to bow out at the bottom. Now, these windows were made each with 4 panels. If you look closely, you'll see 4 heavier lines running horizontally. One through like around Mary's waist, one right under Joseph's beard, right above the stable roof. So those windows went up in 4 panels, not as one big one. But the nice thing is about us, we human beings, when something is broken up in a regular grid, we don't see it anymore. So you don't even notice those 4 lines across there because you follow. And plus, he was very careful. He doesn't have any. He designed it so there's no lines going through anyone's face. He had to think ahead, know how many panels he wanted to build. And as a rule, you never build a panel more than 14 perimeter feet. So that's about the size that we can do and handle safely. So he had to draw those 4 lines out first, and then make sure he fit the figures inside of those lines in a way that it wouldn't even bother you. Although maybe now you'll see them. And then within each panel, there's also a thing called a rebar. There's another line inside of those panels, which for example, he has usually put in a very interesting landscape feature or geometric figure so that he can hide the rebars. That's also very masterful. So there's the designing part and the technical part. Let me look here at what I want to talk about. So, I thought you might want to notice that one of the other conventions that stained glass artists use, Jesus is the only figure, as a rule, that has a halo with the 3 spiritual rays coming out. In this case, they're red, and very consistently red in all of these figures. Only Jesus has those spiritual rays coming out. Making the glass, let's see, the light bulbs, brushes, the rose window. All right, we'll talk about the rose window for a minute. The rose window was done by a different artist, came from Germany. It's like, if you're standing here, it's like a jewel. It's wonderful. Just turn around and look at that. It's just like a jewel. And but it has a completely different choice of glass color. And interestingly, now you see how Robert Metcalfe started with a kind of bronze color for the skin of people. In this window, all the skin tones are from clear glass. And he doesn't use this artist did not use Metcalfe's soft antique brown paint. He uses black paint. So up close, you'll see that all the baby, the faces, everyone is a piece of clear glass with black paint. Very different approach. And then the hair, you'll notice, if you're up close, is stained. So when we say stained glass, when you see those figures in the back, on the clear glass that has yellow, that's actually the stain. The Counter-Reformationists, a long time ago after the 100 Years' War, they had a problem with stained glass and frescoes and statuary, and they smashed and destroyed everything. And then studios, oh yeah, you can see, oh, he's done a nice job, because I have a little screen back there I can see. So you see that it's clear glass, but you see his hair is bright yellow, and that works because it's like a jewel, but that's the only real stained glass here. All the furnaces burned down, people forgot how to make glass, and when they started with Rococo architecture, they wanted lots of light in the buildings because they were so decorative with the brickwork and the carving that they were happy to use clear glass and put the stain on it. The stain is a silver nitrate, and when you heat it up in the kiln, it turns yellow. So that's what you'll find on the back windows, clear flesh colors, black paint, as opposed to this soft brown and some gray black paint, especially that he uses, for example, for white robes, would be way harsh to use black paint on that. So he used some wonderfully decorative colors of paint when he did it. And I wanted to talk about rose windows just in general. Usually there's one on the east and one on the west. And when I came up with this story myself, so this is just my story and my theory. But if you walk into Notre Dame, for example, in Paris, and you see the east window over the altar, and almost all altars are on the east side, the window is pale blues, soft mauves and purples, some whites. It's very peaceful, very, very peaceful. So you are looking at the altar, and I just get a sense of calmness and peace. Now, they have the same design on the west wall, and you walk out that door, and it's orange and red and yellow, and I think, oh yeah, I'm going out now for the week, and I'm all pumped up. And so I think of your window kind of reminds me of that joyous part instead of the soft spiritual part. I think your window back there is just a jewel. So I'm running out of time. So any questions that I can answer? Notice that I said that I can answer.
So in the rose window, if they got the yellow hair as a stain, how did they get the reds and the blues?
Oh, the reds and the blues are, when they're making the glass, I forget if it's selenium or cadmium. There's an oxide that you add to that melted mixture. And there used to be, that they added rubies and they added gold and cobalt and things. But they're actually metal oxides that change the color of the glass. So they're starting with colored glass. He started with colored glass, and then he modified it with paint. Did I answer your question? Okay.
What are the small round windows in the front?
Those are medallion windows, and they're... Do you want me to tell you what the symbols are? Well, that's just a different, more geometric, formal style of symbology. These are figure windows, and those are symbols. So there's certain there's things that you use for God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, usually the descending dove, and usually a hand for God, and often a lamb for Jesus. Yes. According to this book, he did all the other windows. And another thing that's interesting, I know Donna told me that his son designed one window. So I was trying to figure out which one it was. And so what I noticed in the back, where you have a small figure window of Luther and another figure of Dr. Waltham. Now, if you look at the heads here, you'll see that the shape of the glass that they're on is cut in a pretty simple shape that won't break, that's pretty stable. And then if there's any extra space out here, it's blacked in, it becomes negative space. And all of the heads are like that, except Dr. Waltham. If you look at him, the space around his head isn't made black. So his head is on a piece of glass that it's painted, and then there's more glass out here. And I wondered whether his son did that, or what happened with that one. That one is different from all the rest of the heads in all the churches. They're back in your ambulatory, is that what you call that space? Narthex, okay. The old narthex. If he worked every day and had a kiln that went up and down reliably, I would think 6 weeks per panel. That's what I would guess. And he's got to design it, he's got to cut it, he's got to wax it up, he has to paint it, he has to fire it, he has to put it together, he has to solder it, he has to putty it, he has to rebar it, and then get it here. Good. I hope you do, because they're a gem. They're just lovely. They're just wonderful. Everything you ever want to know about stained glass, you know. All right, no question. Oh, there is a question.
The ones with the verses on them, are
Yes.
those stenciled or are they painted?
They're painted. He used so many different fonts. It's very interesting, but that's also painted. Sometimes you can mix it with a special medium, and you can use a calligraphy pen, but it's difficult. These are painted, and the nice thing about that paint, although I said it was a problem when it dries, if you don't use too much gum, you want it to stick to the window but not too much, you can actually go back and clean up edges. So you can use a little sharp point, a little sharp stick, and you can scratch out details. And let me see if I can see. For example, you look at the king in red, and you look at the down his thigh. He has some kind of tunic and a decorative tassel thing. Now that was painted all black, and then he used a scratchy thing to scratch out those little pieces of tapestry or tassels, whatever that's supposed to be. So you can remove the paint before you fire it. Once it's fired, it's there. So if you get a fingerprint on the back, for example, it's there. It might be fun to look on these from the outside and see if we find any fingerprints.
Where did the people who did these, what school did they go to or whatever, or are they just geniuses?
I don't know much about him. I studied in Italy and Holland how to do it, but I don't know where he studied. I was not able to do such a wonderful historical presentation about him. So who knows where he learned? I can't say. But it's a tradition. There's a window that they found from a 9th century church. It's in pieces, and there's big pieces missing. It's a head of Christ. It's painted and stained. So even by the 9th century, this was a craft that was pretty sophisticated already, but we just don't know how all these things got. How do you learn all that? How did it happen? How do you know cow urine is going to work?
Were these artists well paid?
Were they well paid?
Yes.
Well, according to this book, that's a very interesting question. I was thinking, wow, it said he did, this is the sentence. The total cost of the windows throughout the church was $25,000. Now, I asked my husband, well, how often does inflation work? And he said about every 10 years, things double. So I don't know what it's somewhere a little over $1 million, I think, now. So you really have something wonderful here. If you were to find Robert Metcalf now and say, make us 59 windows, he'd say yes, but let's see the down payment. That's a lot of work. Oh, this has got to be a couple years of work.
I don't see Chris Lindquist up here, but she knows when the first window was installed and when the last one was installed, and it was over the course of many, many, many years.
Yes, it's in your book that the first window was the nativity scene, and it was done in time for Christmas service.
In 1955, and the last ones were finished in the mid-60s or late 60s. So it took a long time to get them all installed.
Yes.
And she also has a book about Robert Metcalf, the artist, downstairs.
Oh, she does?
When we go
Good.
down.
I didn't know about that.
It just showed up today.
Oh. Okay.
All right, well, let's thank Mrs. Podulke for her presentation. At this time, you have a number of options available to you. We have some refreshments downstairs in our Faith and Family Center. Mrs. Jane Balow also has a piece of artwork that she will be able to present and say a few words about any way that she presented to the congregation 50 years ago on its 100th anniversary and the 450th anniversary of the congregation. So she'll do that in about 5 or 10 minutes down there after kind of a crowd gets down there. You are also free to wander a little bit here. I think we've blocked off all the parts we don't want you to go in the church, but you can go up and take a closer look at the rose window. There are some stained glass windows through these doors. We have a chapel area back here. There are some towards the back as well. Go ahead and take a closer up look here. Also, Mr. Fiterman and Stephanie have agreed that if you'd like to just talk with them one-on-one about any of what they presented, that they'd be around for a few minutes anyway to do that as well, perhaps starting in here and maybe moving downstairs at some point as well. So with that, again, the main portion here has ended, but head downstairs if you're interested in seeing the piece down there. And again, if you head down there, you can head back upstairs. Feel free to wander a little bit and enjoy the artwork that God has richly blessed us with here at Trinity. Let's close with a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank and praise you for the gifts and talents of many people, past and present. We thank you for those who have presented and will present today and for sharing their gifts and time and talents with us. We thank you for the artists and the members of Trinity. You had the vision to install and work on these pieces of art to your glory that has shown here in this building for 66 years, and we pray will continue to shine for many years more. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to learn more about this artwork today. In Jesus' name, amen.